Love can be a powerful force, one that brings people closer together but also exposes their deepest vulnerabilities. For some, the intensity of their feelings can be both exhilarating and terrifying. It's not uncommon for someone who truly loves you to pull back and seemingly ignore you, not because their feelings are absent, but because they feel too much. Love creates a vulnerability that many are unprepared to face head-on, and ignoring you might be his way of protecting himself from the discomfort that comes with such openness. Imagine this. He's caught between the excitement of feeling deeply connected to you and the fear of what that connection means. When you open yourself up to love, you also open yourself up to the possibility of being hurt. And for some, that's a risk they aren't sure how to take, and so they retreat, hoping to regain control of their emotions. Ignoring you might not make sense on the surface, but it's a sign that he's grappling with an internal struggle. He's not trying to push you away intentionally. Instead, he's trying to find a way to navigate his feelings without losing himself in the process. Vulnerability often feels like standing in the middle of a storm, exposed to every gust of wind and drop of rain. For someone who's not used to being emotionally open, the intensity of love can feel like that storm, unrelenting and overwhelming. Ignoring you, in his mind, might provide shelter, even if only temporarily. It's not about wanting to be apart from you. It's about needing a moment to steady himself before stepping into the whirlwind of emotions again. Sometimes, this behavior is rooted in past experiences, perhaps from torture, heartache, confusion, disease, and then from a place of unhealing. If he's been hurt before, his natural instinct might be to retreat when he starts to feel too much. His love for you may awaken memories of pain or fear of loss, and ignoring you becomes a defense mechanism. He might think that if he doesn't fully show how much he cares, he won't have to face the possibility of losing you. It's paradoxical, but in his mind it makes sense. Keeping a distance feels safer than risking everything. The challenge with love is that it requires trust, not just in the other person, but in yourself. He may not yet trust his ability to handle the depth of his feelings for you. Ignoring you could be a way to buy himself time, to sort through his emotions without feeling pressured to explain them. He might worry that if he opens up too soon, he'll say or do the wrong thing, and so he chooses silence as a way to avoid missteps. It's important to recognize that this behavior, while confusing, often comes from a place of care. If he didn't feel deeply for you, he wouldn't feel the need to protect himself so fiercely. Ignoring you is not the absence of love. It's a reflection of how overwhelming love can be for someone who isn't fully comfortable with vulnerability. When someone loves you but seems to ignore you, it's not always a sign of disinterest. Recognition sometimes gets confused with pride, anger, fear. It's a reflection of how overwhelming love can be. For someone who is ashamed, instead, it's often a signal of their own internal struggles. Love brings out our deepest fears and insecurities, and for someone who's not ready to face those head-on, ignoring you becomes an unspoken plea for time and understanding. The key is to recognize this for what it is, not rejection, but a complicated response to an even more complicated emotion. Understanding this can help you see the bigger picture and navigate the situation with patience and empathy. Sometimes, the most loving thing we can do is give someone the space they need to find their way back to us. Love can be an overwhelming experience, stirring emotions that are powerful and sometimes difficult to understand. When someone deeply cares about you but chooses to ignore you, it might be because they are grappling with their own feelings, trying to make sense of what's happening within them. Love is not always a straightforward journey. It often comes with moments of confusion and emotional turbulence. For someone who struggles with understanding their feelings, pulling away can be an instinctive way to find clarity. It isn't about disregarding you, it's about trying to process the intensity of what they're experiencing. When emotions run high, people often need time to reflect. He might ignore you not out of indifference, but because he needs a moment to sort through his thoughts. Love can trigger a flood of questions. Is this real? Am I ready for this? What does it mean for my life? These questions might feel too big to tackle in the moment, and so the only way he knows to cope is by retreating, creating a space where he can think clearly. It's not an absence of care, but rather an effort to make sense of the depth of his feelings before taking the next step. For some, emotional processing is not something that comes easily. It requires introspection, and introspection often demands solitude. If he's ignoring you, it might be because he's trying to understand his emotions without the influence of external pressures. Being around you, the person who stirs these feelings, might make it harder for him to think objectively. It's not that he doesn't want to be near you, it's that being near you intensifies what he's already trying to process. In his mind, stepping back is the best way to ensure he can fully grasp what's happening inside his heart. The need for emotional processing can also stem from a fear of making mistakes. When someone truly cares, they want to get it right. They don't want to say or do the wrong thing, especially in the early stages of understanding their emotions. Ignoring you might feel safer than risking a misstep that could jeopardize the relationship. It's a way of pausing, of taking a moment to ensure that their actions align with their intentions. To you, it might feel like distance, but to him it's a necessary step toward building something genuine. Sometimes this behavior is rooted in a lack of experience with handling intense emotions. If he hasn't had to navigate these waters before, he might not have the tools to process everything in real time. Ignoring you becomes his way of creating a buffer, a chance to learn and grow without feeling overwhelmed. It's not a reflection of his feelings for you, but rather his way of coping with something he hasn't fully mastered yet. It's also worth noting that emotional processing can be a deeply personal journey. While you might want to help or offer reassurance, he may feel that this is something he needs to do on his own. Love is a shared experience, but personal growth and understanding often happen in solitude. By ignoring you, he's not trying to push you away. He's trying to find clarity so that he can show up in the relationship as his best self. It's an act of care, even if it doesn't feel that way in the moment. When someone loves you but seems distant, it's easy to misinterpret their actions. Genuinely, however, understanding that they might need time to process their emotions can help you see the situation more clearly. It's not about a lack of love or commitment, it's about creating space for reflection and growth. Sometimes the most meaningful connections require patience, and giving someone the time they need to process their emotions is a quiet but profound act of love. Love is a complex emotion, and for some it's as much about testing boundaries as it is about building connections. Have peace in your heart. Sit in peace and be Christian to any bitterness. When someone loves you but seems to ignore you, it might not be an act of neglect or disinterest. It could be a way of testing the waters, trying to understand where they stand and what the relationship means to you both. This isn't about playing games, but rather about seeking clarity in a way that might feel indirect, yet is deeply rooted in their need for reassurance. Sometimes, ignoring you is an unspoken test of the connection's resilience. You don't need to say much to show you love them. He might be trying to gauge how much you care, how you respond when he pulls away, and whether the bond between you can withstand a little distance. It's not necessarily a conscious decision, but an instinctive way of seeking answers to questions he might not even fully articulate. Does she notice when I'm not there? Does she care enough to reach out? These questions might linger in his mind, and by ignoring you, he's watching for answers without explicitly asking. This behavior can also stem from a fear of overwhelming you. He might worry that expressing his feelings too openly or being too available could push you away. By creating a bit of distance, he's testing whether you'll close that gap on your own. It's his way of seeing if you value his presence enough to seek it out, a subtle way of measuring the balance in the relationship. To him, ignoring you isn't about rejection. It's about wanting to understand your feelings more clearly without risking direct confrontation. There's also a vulnerability in testing boundaries. Ignoring you might be his way of revealing his insecurities without actually voicing them. He might wonder if you'll fight for the relationship, if you'll miss him when he's gone, or if you're as invested as he is. It's a quiet plea for validation, wrapped in the guise of indifference. For someone who struggles with expressing their emotions openly, this might feel like the safest way to get the reassurance they crave. At the same time, this need to test boundaries often arises from a place of uncertainty. Love can be intimidating, and he might not know where he fits in your life or what role he plays in your heart. Ignoring you becomes a way to step back and observe, to see how you respond without him actively pushing for answers. It's a way of gathering information, of understanding the dynamics of your relationship without risking vulnerability by directly asking. For some, this behavior is tied to their own fears and past experiences. If he's been in relationships where he gave too much too soon and got hurt, he might be cautious about fully investing without some reassurance that you feel the same. By pulling away, he's protecting himself while also testing whether the relationship has the strength to endure. To him, ignoring you isn't about creating distance, but about seeking proof that love is mutual, that it's safe to let his guard down. Of course, this can be confusing for you. It's hard to interpret silence or absence, especially when you care deeply and want to understand what's going on. If you do distrust him, the pain of this is never going to hit you, but recognizing that his behavior might be about testing boundaries rather than pushing you away can help you see it in a different light. It's not about a lack of love. It's about a desire to understand the depth and stability of the connection. Sometimes, love is about patience, about waiting for the other person to feel secure enough to fully step into the relationship. When someone seems to ignore you, it's easy to feel hurt or confused, but often their actions are driven by their own insecurities and needs. Love is as much about discovery as it is about connection, and sometimes ignoring you is his way of trying to find his footing in the relationship. Understanding this can help you navigate the situation with empathy and care, allowing the bond to grow stronger over time. Love has a way of magnifying our insecurities, and for someone who deeply cares about you, the fear of rejection or not being enough can loom large. When he loves you but seems to ignore you, it might stem from his own internal battles, not from a lack of affection. He may avoid engaging with you because he's afraid of showing his vulnerabilities, worried that if you see all of him, the good, the flawed, and the uncertain, you might decide he's not what you want. Ignoring you becomes a shield, a way to protect himself from the fear of rejection or the possibility that he might fall short in your eyes. This fear often has deep roots. Perhaps he's faced rejection before, and the wounds from those experiences have left him cautious. Loving someone can feel like handing over the most fragile part of yourself and hoping they handle it with care. For him, ignoring you might feel safer than taking that risk. It's not about wanting distance, but about fearing the consequences of being fully seen. What if he says the wrong thing? Or what if you don't feel as deeply as he does? These questions might play on a loop in his mind, making silence feel like the only option. In his heart, he may be measuring every interaction, weighing his words and actions, afraid of missteps. He might think, if I stay quiet, I can't mess this up. But what he doesn't realize is that this silence can be just as confusing and hurtful as any misstep he's trying to avoid. Love requires vulnerability, and for someone who's afraid of not being enough, that vulnerability can feel like standing on the edge of a cliff, not knowing if there's solid ground beneath. Sometimes, ignoring you is his way of creating a buffer, a space where he can try to sort through these insecurities on his own. He might believe that if he steps back, he can gain clarity or build up the courage to face his fears. In his mind, this distance isn't about shutting you out, but about preparing himself to show up fully. However, from your perspective, this behavior can feel like a contradiction, a mix of care and withdrawal that's hard to understand. The fear of inadequacy can also make him hyper-aware of how much he values you. She examined the deep resistance in his eyes and told him more. When someone loves deeply, they often place the person they care about on a pedestal, seeing them as someone extraordinary. While this admiration can be beautiful, it can also lead to feelings of unworthiness. He might think, she's amazing. What if I can't live up to what she deserves? Ignoring you might then become a way to avoid confronting these feelings, a misguided attempt to protect you from his perceived flaws. It's important to remember that this behavior doesn't mean he doesn't care. In fact, it's often the opposite. His fear of rejection or inadequacy is a sign of how much your opinion matters to him. If he didn't care, he wouldn't worry about how you see him or whether he's enough. His silence is not a reflection of his feelings for you, but of his struggles within himself. It's a complex dynamic, one that speaks more to his inner world than to the relationship itself. It's subconsciously feels in her struggle. It makes him feel he's for you. Navigating this situation can be challenging. It's natural to want reassurance, to want him to express his feelings openly. But understanding that his behavior comes from a place of fear and self-doubt can help you approach it with empathy. Sometimes, what he needs most is patience and a reminder that he doesn't have to be perfect to be loved. Love is about seeing and accepting each other, flaws and all. When someone loves you but seems to ignore you, it's often because they're wrestling with their own fears of rejection or inadequacy. It's not an easy place to be for either of you. But with time, understanding, and openness, these fears can give way to a deeper, more honest connection. After all, love isn't about being perfect, it's about being real. When someone loves you, it's not always easy for them to show it in the way you might expect. Love is often misunderstood as being about constant attention and closeness, but sometimes love manifests in ways that seem counterintuitive. For someone who truly cares about you, ignoring you can actually be a way of respecting your independence and showing care in a way that might not be immediately obvious. He might believe that giving you space is the most loving thing he can do, thinking that by stepping back, he's allowing you the freedom to live your life without feeling suffocated or overwhelmed by constant attention. At the core of this behavior is the idea of mutual respect. Sometimes, the most loving relationships are the ones where both individuals feel they have. He may understand that you have your own life, dreams, and ambitions outside of the relationship. And in his mind, ignoring you for a moment might be his way of ensuring that you don't lose sight of those things. His intention is not to push you away, but to give you the space to focus on what matters to you, confident that this will make the connection between you even stronger. This desire to respect your independence can also stem from his own experiences and values. Perhaps he has been in relationships before where the boundaries between two people became too blurred, leading to feelings of smothering or being overwhelmed. He may have learned from those experiences that love doesn't always require constant communication or presence. In his view, stepping back occasionally is a healthy way to avoid the pitfalls of codependency, and he believes this will ultimately create a more balanced and lasting connection. In time, ignoring you isn't an indication that he loves you any less. It's simply a reflection of his desire to honor the space that both of you need to be your best selves. Another reason for this behavior might be rooted in his own need for space and self-reflection. Some people are naturally introspective and need time alone to recharge, especially when their emotions are running high. For someone who loves you, spending time apart might be essential for maintaining their own mental and emotional health. He might not feel that he can be the best partner to you unless he takes the time to reflect on his own thoughts and feelings. It's not about withdrawing from the relationship. It's about ensuring that he's in the right headspace to contribute to it in a meaningful way. By ignoring you momentarily, he's creating the room he needs to return to you with a clearer mind and a more balanced heart. The intention behind this space can also be to prevent overwhelming you with his emotions. Sometimes, when someone feels deeply, they can become consumed by those feelings. And the best way to deal with this overwhelming intensity is to step back. By distancing himself for a short while, he might hope to manage his emotions and prevent them from spilling over in a way that might feel too much for you. He may think that this temporary absence will give both of you the time to breathe and come back to the relationship refreshed, with more clarity and understanding. Though it might not always be obvious, his belief in respecting your independence is also a form of trust. Thinking back to the story, this seems to be your pattern. He trusts that you'll be okay on your own, that you don't need constant attention to feel loved or validated. It's a sign that he doesn't view the relationship as something that needs to be micromanaged or controlled. Instead, he views it as a partnership where both individuals can thrive, even when they're not always physically present for each other. In this way, ignoring you can actually be a quiet testament to his confidence in your bond, in knowing that the connection is strong enough to withstand moments of solitude. If you find yourself feeling hurt or confused by this behavior, try to remember that it's likely coming from a place of care. It might not look like love from the outside, but the space he's creating is meant to preserve the quality of your relationship. This love in its healthiest form isn't about constant closeness. It's about allowing each other the freedom to be who you are, both as individuals and as partners. When he gives you space, it's not a sign that he loves you any less, but that he values both of you enough to recognize the importance of autonomy within a loving connection. Sometimes the most loving thing we can do for each other is to give space, knowing that love will still thrive in the absence. Love can be a complicated journey, especially when two people come from different emotional backgrounds, or when one person struggles to fully understand their own feelings. When someone loves you but seems to ignore you, one possible explanation is emotional immaturity or unreadiness. Not everyone is equipped to navigate the complexities of a relationship with the emotional depth and communication skills that it requires. For some, love may trigger a response they're simply not ready to handle, and as a result they pull away. This isn't necessarily a reflection of their feelings for you, but rather a sign that they're not yet emotionally prepared for the full depth of what a committed relationship entails. Emotional immaturity often manifests as difficulty in expressing feelings clearly or managing the ups and downs of a relationship. Someone who is emotionally immature may struggle to deal with the vulnerability and intensity of love. They might not have developed the skills needed to communicate openly about their feelings, leaving them feeling overwhelmed and unsure of how to act. This can lead to a disconnect in the relationship, with them retreating or ignoring you as a way of avoiding confronting their own emotions. They may not know how to navigate the complexities of love without feeling like they're losing control or making themselves too vulnerable. It's also possible that emotional unreadiness stems from a lack of previous experiences in relationships. If someone has never been in a situation where they've had to manage their emotions in a committed partnership, the weight of love can feel heavy and unfamiliar. They may not have the emotional tools to cope with the vulnerability that comes with true intimacy. For them, ignoring you might feel like the safest option, a way of avoiding the feelings they don't fully understand or know how to handle. The same that love, in this case, may be something they want but aren't yet equipped to experience in a fully mature way. Sometimes this immaturity is tied to an inability to deal with conflict. In the early stages of a relationship, the intensity of emotions can trigger both excitement and anxiety. If someone isn't emotionally ready, the prospect of facing the inevitable challenges that come with building a relationship can be daunting. They might pull away as a defense mechanism, thinking that by creating distance, they're avoiding the discomfort of dealing with any potential problems. They may not yet realize that true love involves working through difficulties together, and instead of leaning in, they instinctively lean out. This behavior can be frustrating for the person on the receiving end, who may feel like they're being pushed away, without understanding why. The fear of emotional intimacy is another factor at play when someone is emotionally immature or unready for love. True emotional intimacy requires a person to open up, to share their fears, hopes, and desires. For someone who isn't emotionally mature, this can feel incredibly vulnerable, almost too much to bear. They might choose to retreat and ignore you because the prospect of sharing themselves fully with you feels terrifying. It's not that they don't love you, it's that they're not yet capable of giving the kind of emotional availability that a deep, committed relationship requires. Additionally, emotional immaturity can manifest as a lack of self-awareness. They might not even recognize that their behavior is hurting you or causing confusion. Their inability to understand how their actions affect others often stems from a lack of emotional development. They might not have learned to take responsibility for their own feelings or recognize the impact of their actions in a relationship. Ignoring you could be their way of avoiding confronting these uncomfortable truths about themselves. And without self-awarenesses, they may not understand that they're creating emotional distance by doing so. It's important to realize people grow and change, and with time, experience, and self-reflection, someone who is emotionally unready can become more mature in their understanding of love. This doesn't mean that the relationship is doomed or that the person doesn't care for you. It simply means they're on a journey of growth that they may need to take on their own terms. If you find yourself in a situation where someone you love is ignoring you because of emotional immaturity, patience and open communication may help them to realize the value of being emotionally present and engaged in the relationship. Love requires emotional maturity to thrive, and while it may take time for someone to reach that level of growth, understanding that their actions are tied to their emotional state rather than their feelings for you can provide clarity and compassion in the midst of confusion.